Hello and welcome to another writing video. I'm Cindy. Today I am talking about the frequent mistakes we make as writers. We've all heard the mantra that we need to show instead of tell. It's kind of been drilled into our brains, but we trip over the process of how we get there. And what I found, honestly, is that the best way to remember to use that, to correct that problem, is to simply write the scene using present tense instead of past tense. You don't want to talk about what the character is seeing or feeling. You change the verb to present tense. Jerry Jenkins, and you may have read some of his works, but when he talks about this issue, he calls it the being, the state of being verbs. Let me give you an example. Jane watched the wind pick up the beach chair at 50 miles per hour as she hurried to get off the beach. Yeah. Kind of passive. Better to write it as 50-mile-per-hour winds blew fiercely, picking up the beach chair as Jane hurried off the beach. So she's hurrying off the beach, and you can see the winds blowing. Otherwise, Jane is watching the wind passively. Although, how can you be passive when you've got 50-mile-an-hour winds coming at you? You see that, right? Okay, the next mistake is the overuse of there. We speak that way often, referring to things over there, or we say there was far too frequently, and when we're writing, we need to pretty much lose the word there. Instead of saying there was a cat sitting on the edge of the road, say a cat stood at the side of the road. Your intention is to reduce and eliminate as much as you can the use of passive speech. Another thing is to avoid the use of vague speech patterns. You do not want the book to be confusing, so you want to be sure to write with clarity. As expressions like seems to, or could be, or whatever, things that are not clear need to be written in concrete terms. It's not, there seems to be an error in the calculations. Well, either there is an error in the calculations or there's not. So, as a writer, you simply decide if there is an error present. And if there is an error, you say there is an error. Or the character found an error. The phrase seems to is confusing. So is the use of approximate or roughly. If you're guessing, your reader will be confused and your writing will be weak. Another mistake is to, and this happens very often when you're writing first-person POV, when you allow the characterization to overpower the other characters. So you just want to be careful with that. I do not tend to write in first POV. Unless I'm writing, when I wrote my book on living with epilepsy, that was my story. That is written in POV. Number one. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But for fiction, I wouldn't, because honestly, I find it confusing. If you don't, good on you. That's wonderful. But you still have to be careful that your characterization doesn't overpower minor and secondary characters. And here's a mistake that is actually more of a cardinal sin, that is promising something in the opening of the story and failing to deliver, When I opened my story on the promise that anything can happen at the Jersey Shore in August, including falling in love when least expected, that's a promise I'm honor bound to deliver in my romance novel. Also, take care and be sure that every scene is essential to the story. Sometimes writers put stuff in because they think it might add some dimension, or maybe just pages and words. But if nothing is happening in that scene, your story doesn't need it. Another big mistake is having stakes that are not high enough. Your stakes have to be high and raise them up. They can be catastrophic. They don't have to be, but it's got to be life-changing. And if you use foreshadow, you should fulfill it. Okay, the rule of thumb is that if there's a knife that shows up in the story, or gun, or anything like that, if there is a knife that shows up in the story, someone has to use it. It doesn't matter. They don't have to use it as a weapon. They can use it for cutting. It doesn't have to be. It could be cutting fish. That's fine, but it's got to be used. And another error that we make is when we're dealing with a large cast of characters. Some writers make the mistake of adding more characters to the story than are needed. Just because a scene or a chapter takes place during Thanksgiving dinner or some other special event does not mean that every character must be introduced and that the relationship to the host defined. Not only is the reader not likely to remember all of those details, but the reader is likely to skip forward to a point in the story where action takes place. Hello, I do that too. This includes me. If I skim through the genealogies in the Bible, you can bank on my doing the same in a novel. If a large cast is needed, like Harry Potter, the best approach, I think, is that the character introduction should be spaced out over a variety of scenes. Introduce them slowly. If the character is not essential to the story, and you can write the character into window dressing, into the setting. The big takeaway is every character that you introduce, that you spend any time with in your story, has to have a goal. Every character that you write about has to have something to do, a reason to be there. If not, window dressing or leave the character out. If you're writing about a hospital scene, you don't need every orderly. You might not need the dietary staff, even though they exist. And they're important, but your story might not need them. Head hopping is a mistake inexperienced writers often make. While it's true that in a novel you can tell through a variety of points of view, this is different than head hopping. Moving from one POV to another in a clear, focused manner is fine. Randomly dropping from one character to another is unfocused, unbalanced, and is confusing as all get out. In head hopping, in head hopping, there are few, if any, transitions, and this throws the story off balance. The easiest way to avoid this pitfall is to either use a very concise transition or just stay in one character POV for the scene or the chapter. Those I find the most helpful to me, and I hope that's helpful to you. Until next time.